Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to be testing out the new Shoulder Essence War Mage Mantle and looking at this in PvE. Let's do it. So firstly I want to test this at the dummy and see if we can hit the same amount of damage as the Crystalline Shadow Shoulder Essence. So basically this is a like for like swap. Everything in my build is the same, and you can see Crystalline Shadow gives 19.2 million damage in 10 seconds. However, this new one gives 15.6. Now, this is not a fair test, and I'll explain why as we continue with this video. But basically, this Disintegrate Essence hits off of different monsters and can stack damage. When you're trying this on a training dummy or a single target, it does not work the same. So let's take a look at what it says about this essence to begin with. So Disintegrate now creates an arcane spear that bounces between multiple enemies, dealing 22,623 damage to enemies in its path while shattering their armor and increasing the damage they take by 6% for 2 seconds, stacking up to a maximum of 3 times. A maximum of 3 charges there as well. Disintegrate cooldown is reduced by 1.6 seconds when damaging enemies, and damage is increased by 10%, and then damage is increased 19%. So those are all the essences that I've got on Disintegrate. So in theory, this should be giving a lot of damage, and it does stack. So we're going to try it here in open world on some mobs to see if we can get it to bounce off. Now, this was my first attempt trying it. You can see sometimes my accuracy rating isn't great, so it doesn't always hit. There it bounced off, so if there was another monster, it would have hit another monster there. You can see some of these mobs actually further up have been killed, so it has obviously bounced off of them, but they were off screen so you couldn't see it. Here's a better idea of it, so you can see it hitting and then it bounces off and hits other enemies. And it's giving quite good damage, 125k there on that wolf. So let's try it here. The Wood Wraith has obviously been hit by one of the orbs that's bounced off. So they do actually bounce quite far. They do actually bounce quite a big distance. But there you can see I completely missed it even though I was aiming for the target. So I don't know how well this works or if it's just because my accuracy rating absolutely sucks. But look, a whole mob there has been destroyed by that bouncing off. Here's a larger mob so we can see if it works on these. You can see it bounces around quite a bit just from one charge. So that does actually work really well, and it does give some good damage because that damage is stacking once it hits multiple times. So I personally think this works really nicely against mobs, but like I said, against single target, it's maybe not the strongest essence to go for. So we're going to go ahead and compare this as well to Crystalline Shadow in a dungeon run to see how this works. Let's go and do that now. So for this test, we're once again visiting one of my favourite dungeons, which is Cavern of Echoes. This is great to run solo, especially if you want to test builds or essences, because you've got mobs here and you've also got 2 bosses to test on as well. So before I start, a huge shout out to Game Zone for compiling the side-by-side for me once again. This is a really handy way of actually seeing exactly how both essences are working. So these builds are identical except for that one shoulder essence. That is the only thing I've swapped out on these builds, and I've tried to do everything identically, so swapping my combat stance at the same point in the dungeon as well, just so that you have a proper idea of how these builds are working. So the War Mage Mantle on the left, I find that this works really nicely for mobs, as I said, because it bounces off. If you have a single target like this, it will take longer to take the boss down, whereas Crystalline Shadow is a continual damage effect. So you can see the Crystalline Shadow, I've already taken down the first boss and I'm already on my way, I'm already moving forward, whereas War Mage Mantle did take a little bit longer to take that down, even with spamming that Disintegrate and constantly hitting that. So as I said, it has 3 charges, so you can literally spam those 3 charges straight away, spam them as soon as they refresh, whereas Crystalline Shadow, for single target, it works much better. So there's pros and cons to both of these shoulders, but we're very, very close to the end now, and I think the Crystalline Shadow is going to definitely win this. Now, I wasn't sure of what the result would be until Game Zone put this side by side together for me. I basically recorded both dungeons with a little bit of extra time at the beginning and end so that I didn't have a clue basically which would be faster, but the Crystalline Shadow did personally still feel a lot faster for me when I ran this. And you can see even with the mobs, Crystalline Shadow does work really well because once it's finished killing one target, it just moves to the next. So it does work very nicely with that continual damage. Now let's just see how quickly we can take the boss down and which shoulder will win. So you can see Crystalline Shadow still has got that advantage. We're still ahead. The boss has fully spawned already. And obviously Crystalline Shadow is giving a continual damage, whereas War Mage Mantle is just going to be giving that 1 hit of damage. Yes, we can hit it 3 times with 3 charges. However, the damage isn't going to be as great as what it is with Crystalline Shadow, which has beaten it by almost 5 seconds in total. Now those are both really quick runs for both shoulders, but we're going to take a look at the two essences and how they compare as well. So with Crystalline Shadow, this gives you Arcane Deputy. So Disintegrate now summons an Arcane Deputy that follows you for 5 seconds. It will continually channel a Disintegrate beam, dealing 8,646 damage to all enemies caught in the beam and causing them to take 2% increased damage for 1.5 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. So that is up to 10% increased damage. Cooldown becomes 9 seconds. Disintegrate damage is increased by 18%. So with that increased damage, that obviously stacks, and that may include damage from other skills and your primary attack as well. It doesn't really make that clear, but if that is the case, obviously that means that will actually be giving you quite a lot of damage with that 10% increase. Now looking at the War Mage Mantle, so this gives Fractured Decay. So Disintegrate now launches a small arcane sphere that bounces between multiple enemies, dealing 22,623 damage to enemies in its path, while shattering their armor and increasing the damage they take by 6% for 2 seconds, stacking up to a maximum of 3 times. Maximum of 3 charges and damage is increased by 18%. So that 3 times, so that means it can stack up to 18% damage. So that is why it was giving good amounts of damage when we tested it in open world on those mobs when it had bounced around a few times and hit. However, as I said, against single target, this is not giving the damage. So ideally, this works better, I would say, in Elder Rifts and Challenge Rifts than in any kind of dungeon or Helicry boss, anything like that. Anything that's single target, you're still better off with the Crystalline Shadow shoulder. So we're going to go ahead now and lastly test this in an Elder Rift to see how it handles the mobs and hope for a good result. So this may be a little bit of a slow Elder Rift because I really want to just try and focus on this shoulder. Unfortunately, my legendary gems like Starfire there will trigger. However, this will give us a better idea of how this essence is actually working. So I'm going to pull together a larger mob here. There's quite a lot of monsters here. So I'm going to pull them together and then test this and see if we can get it to bounce a little bit more. So 142k damage there from this where the damage is stacking. I do feel that it's not as strong as the Crystalline Shadow Shoulder. I mean, that was a really nice essence for Wizard. And these new ones, from what I've read, I mean, I don't feel that excited for any of them. This was the one that I was most excited for, and it doesn't seem to be doing as much as I was hoping for. It would be good if it just bounced off of single target as well. So if it kind of bounced like 3 times or something, so it was actually damaging more than once. Or if it bounced off of walls or something like that as well, rather than just bouncing off of other monsters. But I mean, as I said, against mobs it works well. So in Challenge Rift it would probably be quite a good one. But not necessarily if it's above monster difficulty, like high monster difficulty. You might struggle with that just because it's not really going to give you the damage you need against the boss monster. So personally, I will probably be sticking to the Crystalline Shadow Shoulder because that works really nicely for me in this build and for my dungeons and everything as well. This isn't necessarily the build that I would use in a Rift. However, I wanted to try the shoulder here to give it a fair chance. So that is basically, that's the test over. So overall, to summarise, I would say this shoulder would work really nicely in situations where you're dealing with large mobs. So open world, rifts, and actually also castle defence, it could work really nicely. However, for now, I'm going to be sticking to Crystalline Shadow. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video helpful. And as always, have a great day.